The alien girl's secret. In the distant corners of the galaxy, there existed a planet unlike any other. The inhabitants were not human, but an alien species with advanced technology and extraordinary powers. Among them was a girl, beautiful and mysterious, who lived a life behind a mask. Her name was Thalira. She was tall, with skin that shimmered in the moonlight, and her eyes sparkled like the stars in the sky. To most, she appeared perfect, the ideal image of her kind. But there was something no one knew, something she had hidden from everyone, even from herself for many years. Thalira was infertile. It was a secret she carried in silence. In her world, fertility was revered as one of the highest virtues. Without it, a person's worth was questioned. She had grown up hearing stories about families raising children, knowing that her future would never be the same as theirs, and so she hid behind her mask. The mask was not just a symbol of beauty. It was a shield, a way to keep the world from seeing her true self. When she put it on, no one could see her face or her pain. It was the perfect disguise. The mask covered more than just her physical features. It covered her soul, her fears, and her shame. Thalira had never told anyone about her condition. To do so would mean facing rejection and the loss of everything she had worked for. The way people looked at her would change. She would no longer be the girl they admired. Instead, she would become a broken soul, someone to pity and avoid. The thought of it terrified her. So she kept her secret buried deep inside her, where no one could find it. But Thalira's life was not just filled with fear. There was also a sense of longing, a desire for something more. She often dreamed of meeting someone who could see her for who she truly was, someone who would accept her, mask or no mask. Yet she knew such a person was rare. In a world of perfection, who would ever want to be with someone like her? The alien city where Thalira lived was bustling with activity. It was a place full of life, where beings from across the galaxy came and went. Merchants sold their goods, travelers shared stories, and scholars exchanged ideas. But amidst all this, Thalira felt alone. Even in the crowd, she was isolated. No one knew the real her. No one could. One evening, while walking through the busy streets, Thalira saw a group of humans who had arrived from another planet. They were explorers, travelers seeking knowledge of the galaxy. Thalira had seen humans before, but they always kept their distance, viewing her and her people with curiosity and wonder. They were fascinated by the advanced technology of her species, but never truly understood them. That night, one of the humans caught her attention. His name was Rylan, a tall and strong man with kind eyes. Unlike the others, he didn't seem frightened or overawed by the alien world. He spoke with confidence, with a quiet strength that drew Thalira in. Their eyes met across the crowd, and for a brief moment, Thalira felt something stir inside her, a feeling she hadn't experienced in years. It was hope. For the first time in a long time, she wondered if someone could see beyond her mask. But she quickly pushed the thought away. No human would ever accept her. She was too different, too broken. They would never understand the burden she carried. Thalira turned away, hiding her face behind the familiar mask. Rylan, however, seemed determined. He watched her leave and couldn't shake the feeling that there was something special about her. He had traveled far and seen many worlds, but he had never encountered anyone like her before. There was a mystery about her, something intriguing, something he wanted to understand. For days, Rylan searched for her, hoping to speak with her, but she always remained elusive, slipping through the crowd like a shadow. The more he searched, the more determined he became. There was something about her that called to him, something that made him feel as though he needed to know her story. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, he found her again, standing alone in the quiet of a marketplace. Thalira didn't notice him at first, her eyes cast down as she carefully inspected the goods around her. Rylan walked closer, his heart racing with anticipation. "Excuse me," he said softly, not wanting to startle her. Thalira froze. Her heart skipped a beat. She knew that voice. She had heard it before. She turned slowly, her eyes meeting his. She was surprised to find herself feeling nervous. There was something in his gaze that made her feel exposed, as if he could see through her mask. She quickly looked away, unable to hold his gaze for long. "I've been trying to find you," Rylan continued. "I wanted to speak with you. You're different. There's something about you that I can't understand. I'd like to know you better." Thalira's chest tightened. No one had ever said anything like that to her before. But it wasn't just the words that caught her attention. It was the sincerity in his voice, the way he looked at her as if he truly wanted to understand. For a moment, she thought about running, about retreating into the safety of her loneliness. But something inside her told her not to. Maybe it was time to stop hiding. Maybe it was time to let someone see the real her. But even as she considered this, the weight of her secret pressed down on her. She wasn't ready to let go of the mask. Not yet. Still, there was something in Rylan's eyes that made her believe she could be. And for the first time in years, Thalira felt a small spark of hope. The unexpected encounter. It was a quiet evening, the sun slowly setting behind the towering city structures, casting long shadows across the marketplace. Thalira walked along the familiar streets, her mind heavy with the thoughts of the day. The mask she wore was more than just an accessory. It was her shield, the barrier that kept the world from seeing her true self. But today, it felt heavier than usual. The weight of her secret was becoming unbearable. She tried to push the thoughts out of her mind, focusing instead on the routine tasks she had set for herself. She wandered from stall to stall, her gaze briefly flicking to the colorful objects on display. Gems, fabrics, trinkets from far-off worlds. Nothing caught her interest. Everything seemed so distant, as if she were floating above it all, a part of the crowd, but also apart from it. And then she saw him again. Rylan. He stood near a stall, examining something carefully with a thoughtful expression on his face. His posture was relaxed, yet there was an air of quiet strength about him. His dark hair was windswept from his travels, and his piercing blue eyes scanned the surroundings with an intensity that seemed to notice everything and nothing all at once. Thalira's heart skipped a beat. She didn't want to look, but she couldn't tear her eyes away. It was as though there was an invisible thread pulling her toward him. She quickly turned her gaze to the ground, hoping he hadn't seen her. The last thing she wanted was to draw attention to herself. But as if fate had other plans, Rylan turned and caught sight of her. Their eyes met across the busy street. For a split second, everything around them seemed to fade away. The noise of the marketplace, the chatter of the crowd, the hum of alien technology. It all disappeared, leaving just the two of them, standing still in the middle of a bustling world. Thalira froze, her breath caught in her chest. A wave of panic rushed over her. She could feel the mask pressing against her skin, but it wasn't enough to shield her from the wave of emotions she was suddenly experiencing. This wasn't supposed to happen. She was supposed to remain invisible, hidden behind the mask that protected her from the world. But now, here was this human, this stranger, who had pierced through the layers of her carefully constructed life. Rylan didn't look away. Instead, he smiled. It was warm, kind, and so different from the way others had treated her in the past. His gaze wasn't filled with pity or judgment. No, it was filled with curiosity, with interest. Thalira couldn't remember the last time someone had looked at her like that. After a few moments that felt like an eternity, Rylan took a step forward. Thalira's heart raced. She instinctively took a step back, but he didn't seem to notice her hesitation. His eyes remained fixed on her, as though he was trying to understand her, to see through the mask and into the person she was hiding beneath. "Excuse me," Rylan said, his voice gentle yet firm. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything. I've seen you around and Thalira quickly cut him off, her voice sharp. "I'm not interested," she said, almost in a whisper, but loud enough to be heard. Her cheeks flushed with embarrassment as she immediately regretted her words. She had been so caught off guard that she didn't know how else to respond. She hadn't expected him to speak to her, let alone try to strike up a conversation. The last thing she wanted was to get close to someone who might eventually find out her secret. Rylan raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by her reaction. But instead of walking away, he took another step forward, his expression thoughtful. "I didn't mean to offend you," he said, his voice steady and calm. I don't know. There's something about you." Thalira's heart skipped again. His words were gentle, not harsh or critical. It was as though he was trying to understand something about her, but she wasn't ready to let him in. Not yet. She felt the familiar weight of fear creeping back into her chest, threatening to overtake her. I have nothing to say," Thalira said, taking another step back. She wanted to run, to hide. But for some reason she couldn't. There was something about this man that made her feel exposed, vulnerable, like he was seeing right through her. Rylan didn't give up. He simply smiled again, the same warm smile that made her heart ache. "It's okay," he said. "You don't have to say anything if you don't want to. But I'd like to talk to you. There's something different about you. I don't know how to explain it, but I've been looking for you." Thalira stared at him, her mind racing. Why was he so persistent? He didn't know her secret. Why was he trying to talk to her like this? She had lived her life in isolation, keeping everyone at a distance, afraid of what they might think if they knew the truth. She had never expected anyone to want to get to know her. But here was this human, standing before her, offering something she hadn't dared to hope for. Understanding, kindness, and maybe, just maybe, acceptance. For the first time in years, Thalira felt a flicker of something deep inside her. It was small, but it was there. Could it be hope? "I'm not like everyone else," Rylan continued, his voice gentle but firm. "I won't judge you. I want to know you, Thalira. I don't know why, but I do." Thalira's heart raced as his words sank in. She could feel the walls she had built around herself starting to crumble. She wanted to push him away, to retreat into the comfort of her loneliness, but something inside her was pulling her toward him. She had never been this close to someone who saw her for more than just the mask. But she was scared, terrified of what might happen if she let him in. Rylan reached out, as though sensing her hesitation. "I'm not asking for anything," he said softly. "I just want to talk. No masks, no walls. Just you and me." Thalira stood still, her mind in turmoil. Could she do it? Could she let go of the mask and reveal her secret? The idea terrified her, but at the same time, there was a quiet voice in her head telling her to take a chance, to trust him. And for the first time in a long while, Thalira decided to listen to that voice. The alien's mask begins to slip. As days passed, the strange sense of unease that Thalira felt began to settle into something more powerful, a longing she could no longer ignore. The human, Rylan, had taken her words to heart. He had respected her distance, never pushing her too hard, but he hadn't disappeared either. He kept coming back to the marketplace, always near, always watching. Each time their eyes met, Thalira felt a pull, a connection that was impossible to explain. She found herself questioning everything she knew about herself. At first, she had been convinced it was a momentary lapse in judgment, a fleeting feeling that would pass. But the more she saw Rylan, the more she felt an unfamiliar warmth growing inside her, something she had never dared to experience. She had spent so long hiding her true self from the world, behind the mask and in the shadows, that even the smallest glimpse of something real felt like a dangerous temptation. She had never wanted to risk letting anyone in. She had never wanted anyone to see beyond the perfect facade she so carefully crafted. But now, that mask, the thing that had protected her for so long, began to feel like a prison. The walls she had built around herself were beginning to crack, and each time she saw Rylan, it became harder to maintain her distance. One evening, as she walked through the city streets, lost in thought, she felt his presence again. Rylan was leaning against a stone pillar, his gaze fixed on her, waiting, as though he had been expecting her. Thalira hesitated, her pulse quickening, her mind swirling with confusion. The thought of running crossed her mind again, but she was tired of running. Something in her was changing. She could feel it deep in her bones. Taking a deep breath, she walked toward him. She couldn't ignore this feeling anymore. She needed to face it, for better or for worse. Rylan straightened as she approached, his face lighting up with a quiet smile that seemed to melt away the tension she had been carrying. "Thalira," he said softly, "I've been hoping to see you again." She looked at him, feeling her heart race. There was something different about him today, something in his eyes that made her wonder if he could see through the walls she had so carefully built. She didn't speak for a long moment, trying to gather the courage to say something, anything, but the words wouldn't come. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of silence, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know why you keep coming back," she said, her voice trembling. "I've told you before. I'm not what you think I am." Rylan took a small step closer, his expression soft and understanding. "And what do you think I believe?" he asked. "That you're some perfect being, like the rest of your kind." Thalira looked down, her fingers nervously fiddling with the hem of her cloak. She couldn't tell him the truth, not yet. How could she? The thought of revealing her infertility, the thing she had kept hidden for so long, felt like an unbearable weight on her chest. "You're not like the others," she said finally, her voice steadying. "I'm not like the others, Rylan. You don't understand." "Maybe I don't," Rylan replied, his voice gentle. "But I want to understand. I want to know you, Thalira. I don't care about your kind's perfection, or what anyone else thinks. I care about you." Her breath hitched. No one had ever said anything like that to her. Thalira had lived a life where her worth was determined by her ability to conform, to be perfect, to live up to the impossible standards of her people. She had grown up hearing that only those who could bear children were truly valuable. Without fertility, she was nothing in their eyes. The mask had been her only way to hide that part of herself, the part she was ashamed of. But here was Rylan, looking at her as if the mask didn't matter, as if she didn't need to hide behind it anymore. "I can't let you in," Thalira whispered, her voice breaking. "I'm not like them. I'm not like anyone. I can never be what you want." Rylan's eyes softened, and for a moment, it seemed like he could see the turmoil inside her, the struggle she had been battling alone for so long. "I don't want anything from you, Thalira. I just want you to know that I'm not here to judge you. I'm here because I believe you're worth knowing. All of you." The words hung in the air between them, a silence that spoke volumes. Thalira felt something inside her shift. The wall she had built, the wall that had kept her isolated from everyone and everything, started to crack. She was afraid of the unknown, afraid of being vulnerable. But there was something in Rylan's words, in the way he looked at her, that made her feel like maybe, just maybe, it was time to let the mask slip. She stood there for a long time, looking at him, feeling a warmth spread through her chest that she had never felt before. It was a strange feeling, like hope, but deeper, more intense. It was as if, for the first time, she felt like she didn't have to carry her secret alone. "Why me?" she asked softly, her voice trembling with uncertainty. "Why do you care?" Rylan smiled again, his eyes filled with something Thalira couldn't quite understand, but she felt it in her bones. "I don't know why," he said quietly. "I just do. And I think you're more than what you believe yourself to be." Her heart raced at his words. She wanted to believe him, but fear still held her back. The fear of what might happen if she let him see the real her. The fear of being rejected, of losing everything she had built, everything she had worked so hard to protect. But in that moment, as she stood before him, something inside her finally broke. The mask she had worn for so long began to feel heavier than ever, and Thalira realized that perhaps it was time to let go. Maybe, just maybe, it was time to trust someone. To trust him. For the first time, she slowly reached up to touch the mask that had defined her for so long. The fingers that trembled as they touched the smooth surface of the mask seemed to reflect the uncertainty she felt inside, but also the courage that was slowly growing within her. Rylan watched her in silence, his expression soft and patient. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He simply waited, as if he knew this was a moment she had to take on her own. With a deep breath, Thalira made her choice. The mask slipped off. And for the first time in years, Thalira faced the world. Truly faced it, without hiding behind the one thing that had kept her safe. The shocking revelation. The night that followed Thalira's decision to remove her mask was filled with a heavy, almost suffocating silence. She hadn't expected to feel so exposed, so vulnerable. But as the mask slipped from her face and hit the ground with a soft thud, the world around her seemed to freeze, as though holding its breath. Thalira could feel the cool airbrush against her bare skin, but it wasn't the cold that made her shiver. It was the realization that she had just revealed her most guarded secret, not just to herself, but to Rylan as well. She didn't look up at first. Her eyes were fixed on the ground, her heart hammering in her chest. She had spent so many years hiding behind the mask, telling herself that it was the only way to protect herself. But now that it was gone, she felt more exposed than ever. What would he think of her? Would he see the truth she had spent her entire life running from? Rylan was silent. For a long time, he didn't speak. His gaze remained steady on her, but there was no judgment in his eyes. No surprise, just calm understanding. Finally, Thalira couldn't stand the silence anymore. She looked up, her eyes meeting his. She felt her breath catch in her throat. There it was again, the same warmth, the same kindness that had drawn her to him from the very beginning. It was as though the mask had never been there at all, as though he had always seen her for who she truly was. But it wasn't just her appearance that worried her now. It was the truth she had kept hidden for so long. She had lived in constant fear that if anyone found out, they would see her as broken, as defective. Infertility was a curse in her world, a flaw that could not be ignored. She had never been able to bear children, and because of that, she was seen as incomplete, as someone who could never fully be a part of her people. The realization hit her like a thunderclap, and she finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm infertile, Rylan. I can't have children. I know you probably think that's not a big deal, but where I come from, it is. I've spent my whole life hiding this, trying to be something I'm not, trying to be someone I can never be." Rylan's expression softened, but there was no pity in his eyes, no look of rejection, as she had feared. Instead, he stepped closer, his presence steady and comforting. "Thalira," he said, his voice quiet but firm, "you don't have to explain yourself to me. I never asked you to be anything you're not. I just want to know you, the real you, the one who's standing here in front of me, not the one you've been hiding behind for so long." Thalira felt something stir in her chest, a mixture of relief and disbelief. She had expected him to recoil, to tell her that her condition was something to be fixed, something to be ashamed of. But instead, he had simply accepted her, the real her, without question. In that moment, it became clear that Rylan wasn't like the others. He wasn't looking for perfection. He was looking for her. But even as relief washed over her, a new wave of panic began to rise in her chest. She had told him everything, or so she thought. But there was more, something even more impossible, something that had only just begun to reveal itself. Thalira's hand trembled as she placed it over her stomach, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself to feel the change that had taken place within her. There was a stirring, a presence, something growing inside her, something that shouldn't be possible. It wasn't just a feeling anymore. It was real. She began, her voice faltering. "I didn't want to say anything, but there's something else, something that doesn't make sense." Rylan looked at her with a mix of concern and curiosity, sensing the shift in her demeanor. "What is it, Thalira?" I'm pregnant," she whispered, almost as though speaking the words aloud would make them more real. I can't explain it. I don't know how it happened, but I'm pregnant, and I don't know how this could be possible. It defies everything I've been told, everything I've known about my own body." Ryland's eyes widened in shock, but he didn't pull away. He didn't question her. Instead, he reached out, placing a hand on her shoulder, offering her a silent reassurance. "I don't understand either," she continued, her voice shaking. "I've never been able to carry a child before. My people, they said I was broken, that I would never be able to have a family. And now, this pregnancy, it doesn't make sense. It shouldn't be happening." Ryland took a deep breath, his mind racing with the possibilities. He didn't have all the answers, but he knew one thing for sure. This was not a curse. This was not something to be afraid of. Falira was carrying life, and that, in itself, was a miracle. "Falira," he said gently, his voice steady but filled with awe. "This isn't a curse. This is something incredible. Whatever happened, however this happened, it's a sign. You're not broken. You're capable of more than you think." Falira's eyes filled with tears. She hadn't expected this, hadn't expected him to see her condition as anything other than an impossible obstacle. But Ryland wasn't afraid. He wasn't repulsed by the idea of her infertility. Instead, he saw the miracle of life growing inside her, something that had never been possible before. For the first time in her life, Falira felt the weight of her secret lift. She had feared that the truth would destroy her, that it would push Ryland away. But instead, it had brought them closer together. She had never imagined that she could be loved, truly loved, for the person she was, flaws, scars, and all. As Ryland gently squeezed her shoulder, she allowed herself to believe, just for a moment, that everything could change, that her life could be different, that she could be different. And maybe, just maybe, this unexpected pregnancy was the beginning of something new, not just for her, but for humanity itself. The rising suspense. Falira could barely contain the storm of emotions swirling inside her. The news of her pregnancy was both a blessing and a curse, a miracle that defied all logic and reason. She had lived her entire life believing that she was incomplete, broken even because of her infertility. She had hidden behind a mask, a facade of perfection, because the truth, her inability to bear children, was something she believed no one could ever accept. But now, standing before Ryland, a human who saw her for who she truly was, that mask had shattered. And yet, the revelation of the pregnancy felt more like a weight than a gift. She didn't know how to feel. The days that followed were a blur. She could feel the life inside her growing, slowly, gently, but with every passing day, the unease inside her grew. She had always been told that it was impossible for someone like her to bear a child. In her world, only those who were fertile were truly valued. It was a truth that was ingrained into every aspect of her society, a truth that had shaped her very existence. And now, this impossible pregnancy was threatening to tear down everything she had known about herself, about her place in the universe. Ryland stayed by her side, of course, offering comfort and support, but Falira couldn't shake the feeling that she was heading into uncharted territory, where the consequences of her actions could be far greater than she could ever anticipate. As the pregnancy progressed, she began to feel more isolated, more alone, even with Ryland's constant presence. He didn't understand what it meant to be infertile in her world, to be looked at with pity and rejection by her people. He couldn't comprehend the shame she had carried for so long, and how her very identity had been built around the idea that she was less than others because of something she could never change. There were moments when she felt she could trust him completely, when she could feel the warmth of his acceptance wrapping around her like a blanket. But there were also moments when doubt crept in, when she wondered if this was all just too much for him to handle. After all, what if he learned the truth about her infertility? What if he realized that the pregnancy was a fluke, a glitch in the system? What if he couldn't handle the reality of her situation? Falira's thoughts were interrupted one evening when she and Ryland decided to visit the alien city's outer limits, The stars were clearer from the high cliffs, and the view of the galaxy stretched out before them in all its vastness. Rylan had suggested it as a way to get away from the overwhelming questions and emotions that had begun to crowd Thalira's mind. He wanted to show her the beauty of the universe, to remind her that there was more to life than the burden she had been carrying. As they stood on the edge of the cliff, the wind sweeping through their hair, Thalira couldn't shake the sense that something was coming, something she couldn't avoid, something that would force her to confront the truth. The distant stars seemed to shimmer with a warning, and a cold shiver ran down her spine. There was something she hadn't yet told Rylan, something she wasn't ready to share. She knew, deep down, that the truth of her condition could never be fully hidden from him. As much as she wanted to believe that she could keep him in the dark, she knew that the pregnancy, the very life growing inside her, would eventually lead him to ask the questions she feared most. "Rylan," Thalira said quietly, breaking the silence between them. "I don't know what's happening. I don't know how this pregnancy is even possible. It's like the universe is mocking me, like everything I've been taught is wrong." Rylan turned to her, his face filled with concern. "Thalira, you don't need to have all the answers right now. It's okay to not know. What matters is that you're not alone in this. We'll figure it out together." But Thalira couldn't shake the unease gnawing at her. Her body was changing in ways she didn't understand, and she had no idea what this pregnancy would mean for her future. What if it wasn't a blessing at all? What if it was a sign that her world was coming to an end, that the life she had known was crumbling around her? As they stood there, watching the stars, Thalira's mind raced. She could feel the weight of the unknown pressing down on her, and it was growing harder to breathe. The universe, vast and unyielding, seemed to be mocking her uncertainty, daring her to confront the truth. "I don't know if I'm ready for this, Rylan," Thalira whispered, her voice trembling. "I don't know if I can handle what's coming." Rylan stepped closer to her, his hand reaching out to gently grasp hers. "You don't have to be ready," he said softly. "We'll face whatever comes together. You don't have to carry this alone." The sincerity in his voice sent a wave of warmth through her chest, but the fear inside her remained. There was more to her story, more to her past, and she knew that eventually Rylan would have to face the truth. She couldn't keep hiding forever. Later that night, as they returned to their small home, Thalira lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The quiet hum of the city outside only added to the silence inside her mind. She had thought she was ready to embrace this new chapter of her life, but the closer she got to facing the full extent of her situation, the more she realized just how little she understood. She wasn't just afraid of the pregnancy. She was afraid of what it meant for her place in the universe. She was afraid of what would happen when her people discovered the truth. And most of all, she was afraid of what would happen when Rylan learned the entire story. The truth about her infertility, the impossible pregnancy, and the consequences that would follow. But as the hours passed, Thalira's thoughts began to shift. Maybe she didn't have to face it all at once. Maybe, with Rylan by her side, she could take it one step at a time. There were still so many unanswered questions, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like she didn't have to face them alone. In the days that followed, Thalira and Rylan continued to grow closer, their bond strengthening with each passing moment. But the tension between them remained. Thalira knew that the moment of truth was coming. She could feel it in her bones. She had already opened up to Rylan in ways she never thought possible, but the final revelation was still looming. What would happen when he learned everything? Would he still stand by her side, or would this revelation be the breaking point? The suspense built, day by day, until the inevitable moment would arrive. Thalira could only hope that when it did, she would be strong enough to face it, with Rylan by her side, no matter the consequences. A moment of courage. The days felt heavier now, each one dragging on longer than the last. The weight of Thalira's secret was suffocating, and with each passing hour, it seemed more and more likely that the truth would come spilling out. Her world had been turned upside down by the pregnancy, and every decision she made now seemed clouded by the fear of what it might mean for her future. The growing life inside her was a constant reminder of everything that had once seemed impossible, and yet now it was her reality. And as much as she wanted to hold on to the hope that everything would work out, there was still the undeniable truth. She had to face what was coming sooner or later. The quiet moments with Rylan had become her sanctuary, but even those moments were starting to feel strained. There were things she hadn't told him, things she was terrified to share. She had told him about her infertility, the thing that had plagued her since birth, but she hadn't yet revealed the full depth of her fears. The pregnancy was an unexpected gift, yes, but it was also a ticking time bomb, one that could tear apart everything she had worked so hard to build. Her people would never accept this. She could already hear the whispers in the streets, the mocking voices that would call her broken once again, only now with the added insult of her impossible pregnancy. Thalira spent most of the day in silence, watching the sun dip lower in the sky, knowing that when Rylan returned, the time would come for her to make a decision. She couldn't keep hiding from the truth. She couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine when she knew, deep down, that the future was full of uncertainties. The weight of the pregnancy inside her was only growing, both physically and emotionally. She couldn't keep living like this, torn between the love she had for Rylan and the fear of what he might think when he discovered everything. When Rylan finally came home that evening, he found her sitting on the edge of their bed, her eyes focused on the floor, lost in thought. Her heart raced as he stepped closer, his presence comforting but also overwhelming. She could feel the tension in her chest tighten at the sight of him. He was the only one who could help her, but he was also the one who would have to face the truth she had been running from for so long. Rylan sat beside her, his hand gently brushing against hers. "Thalira, what's wrong? You've been distant all day. Talk to me." Thalira felt a lump form in her throat. This was it. This was the moment she had feared, the moment where she would have to expose everything. The truth, the impossible pregnancy, the fear of rejection. Her mind screamed at her to run, to hide, to say nothing at all. But deep down, she knew that if she didn't tell him now, the silence would only eat away at them both. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about them, their future together. If they were going to face this, they had to face it together. Taking a deep breath, Thalira turned to him, her voice barely a whisper. "Rylan, I've been hiding something from you, something that's been eating at me. I know I told you about my infertility, but there's more. This pregnancy, it's not just a miracle, it's a paradox. It shouldn't be happening. It's impossible. I don't know why or how it happened, but I'm scared. I'm scared of what it means, what it could mean for us, for me, for everything." Rylan listened without interrupting, his eyes never leaving her face. He could see the pain in her eyes, the fear, the uncertainty. But there was no judgment, no anger, just understanding. It was as though he had been waiting for her to open up, to reveal the depths of her heart, and now that she had, he was ready to face it with her. "Thalira, listen to me," Rylan said, his voice steady and reassuring. "I know this is terrifying for you. I can't pretend to understand exactly what you're going through, but I do know that what we have is real. And I want to be here with you, through whatever comes next. I'm not going anywhere." Thalira looked at him, her heart aching with the weight of his words. She wanted to believe him, more than anything. But the fear still lingered, gnawing at her insides. She wasn't sure she could handle the consequences of this pregnancy, and she wasn't sure she could bear the thought of facing them alone. "But what about your people, Rylan? What about my people?" she asked, her voice trembling. "If they find out about this, if they find out that I'm carrying a child, everything will change. I don't know what will happen, but I'm afraid. I'm afraid of what they'll do to us, what they'll do to me. I'll be an outcast. I'll be nothing." Rylan's hand cupped her cheek gently, urging her to meet his gaze. "You're not nothing, Thalira. You never were. And I don't care what anyone else thinks. What matters is that we face this together, no matter what happens. I'm not asking you to have all the answers right now, but you don't have to face this alone anymore." Thalira's chest tightened with emotion as the weight of his words sank in. For the first time since this journey had begun, she allowed herself to feel a flicker of hope. She didn't have to carry this burden by herself. Rylan was here, standing beside her, willing to face whatever challenges came their way. And that, in itself, was a revelation. It was the first time she truly believed that the impossible could happen, that she could have a future, not just with Rylan, but with the child growing inside her. Taking a deep breath, Thalira finally spoke the words that had been buried deep within her heart. "I'm scared, Rylan, but I'm ready. I'm ready to face whatever comes next. With you." Rylan smiled, his eyes filled with pride. "We'll face it together, Thalira, one step at a time." For the first time in a long while, Thalira felt the weight of her fears begin to lift. She wasn't sure what the future would hold, or how the pregnancy would unfold, but she knew one thing for certain: she wasn't alone anymore. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to face whatever challenges lay ahead. A new beginning. The days that followed were filled with uncertainty, yet there was something different in the air now. For the first time, Thalira wasn't facing her fears alone. Rylan stood by her side, unwavering in his support, offering her the strength she needed to keep moving forward. It wasn't easy, and there were moments when doubt crept in, when the weight of the unknown seemed almost too much to bear. But no matter how much the world seemed to close in on her, Thalira held on to one undeniable truth: she wasn't alone anymore. The pregnancy, still a mystery in many ways, continued to grow. Each day, Thalira felt the subtle movements of the child inside her, a reminder that life was blossoming within her, despite the odds. It wasn't just a physical change. It was a transformation that reached deep into her soul. She had spent so much of her life feeling like an outsider, like she was incomplete. But now, for the first time, she felt a sense of purpose that she had never known before. Rylan was there, every step of the way. They spent their days talking about the future, about what it might look like. Even though neither of them had the answers, the unknown still loomed large. What would her people think when they found out about her pregnancy? Would they accept her, or would they cast her aside as they had so many others? What would happen to the child growing inside her, a child that defied the very laws of nature? But in those quiet moments when they were together, the worries seemed to fade into the background. With Rylan's hand in hers, Thalira began to understand something she had never truly grasped before. The future wasn't something that could be predicted or controlled. It was something that could only be lived, one moment at a time. And so, they made a decision. They decided to take a journey together, away from the city, away from the expectations that had shaped her life for so long. It wasn't a grand adventure in the traditional sense, but it was an adventure nonetheless. They would travel to the outer edges of the galaxy, to places where no one knew them, where no one cared about their past. It was a chance for Thalira to finally break free of the chains that had held her for so long. As they prepared for their journey, Thalira couldn't help but feel a sense of hope she had never known. She wasn't running away from her past. She was running towards something new, something better. The child growing inside her was a symbol of that change, the living testament to the fact that even the impossible could become real. One evening, as they stood on the edge of a cliff, watching the sunset together, Thalira turned to Rylan. The sky was painted with brilliant shades of orange and purple, and the stars were just beginning to appear, twinkling in the darkening sky. For a moment, the world seemed still, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. "Rylan," Thalira began, her voice soft but filled with conviction, "I don't know what will happen next. I don't know what the future holds, or how my people will react when they find out about the pregnancy. But I do know this: I'm ready. Ready to face whatever comes our way. Ready to be the person I was always meant to be." Rylan smiled, his eyes warm with affection. "You've always been that person, Thalera," he said softly. "You've just had to find it within yourself, and now you've found the courage to embrace it. I'm proud of you." Thalera felt a surge of emotion at his words. She had spent so long hiding, so long thinking she wasn't enough, that she had never considered the possibility that she was already everything she needed to be. The pregnancy had changed her, yes, but it had also shown her the truth. She was capable of far more than she had ever given herself credit for. As they turned to leave the cliffside, the stars above them growing brighter with each passing moment, Thalera felt the first true sense of peace she had ever known. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time in her life, she was ready to face it head-on. She had Rylan by her side, and the child growing inside her was a promise of new beginnings, of hope, and of strength. In the distance, the first lights of a new dawn were beginning to appear on the horizon. The world was full of possibilities, endless, unknown, and yet full of promise. And for the first time, Thalera was ready to walk into that future, with her heart open and her mind clear. The journey ahead was uncertain, and there would be challenges they would face, but they would face them together. The fear that had once consumed her was now nothing more than a distant memory. She was no longer the girl hiding behind a mask, afraid of her own truth. She was Thalera, the mother-to-be, the warrior of her own destiny, and the hero of her own story. Together with Rylan, they would write the next chapter of their lives, a story filled with love, strength, and the kind of courage that could change the universe itself.